There are 7 billion people in the world, and almost 1 billion more each decade. People are getting older, living longer, moving to more urban areas. Sanitation counts. Hygiene is the foundation of health, and with healthcare spending under pressure, self-care is a must. At all ages, in all places, health matters more than ever. We have a fight on our hands, and RB is ready to go, making access to the highest quality hygiene, wellness and nourishment a right, not a privilege. People want to buy online, at home, in their local stores, wherever they are, in the way that makes sense to them. They want information. That's why we are fighting to make that access possible. So what are we bringing? Exceptional brands, exceptional people, delivering quality products that people love, online and offline, giving them what they need. Backed by partnerships for science, for innovation, for new solutions to problems new and old. At scale, truly global. For hygiene, for health, for nutrition, for everyone, everywhere. We need to rejuvenate our company for the benefit of all. Consumers, customers, our partners, our shareholders, now and in the future. That is why we have a plan for sustainable growth. Our compass guides us. Fulfilling our potential means we do the right thing, always. We put consumers and people first, striving for excellence in everything we do, seeking out new opportunities and creating shared success so everyone benefits. We protect, heal, and nurture in the relentless pursuit of a cleaner, healthier world. We are RB.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you who joined us live on this webinar series on the topic of in-flight campaign optimization using multi-touch attribution. And I hope you enjoyed the video introducing our client, RB. So I'm very excited about today's webinar, and I'll tell you why. So this is about how we are working with a company called Reckitt Benckiser that is a leading provider of health and hygiene, which is one of the most important consumer products today to keep our community clean, safe, and healthy, especially during this pandemic. And we're helping them get most out of their marketing investment with advanced machine learning. My name is Tenzin Namdak, and I'm going to be the moderator for today's webinar, and I'm very excited to be here. So we have industry thought leaders as panelists for today's discussion, and they are here today with the valuable insights backed by data. So first, let me introduce you to our guest speaker, Rineet Ratnakar, the CIO of RB. So Rineet comes from 15 years in consumer goods industry, implementing advanced technology solutions for business with in-depth knowledge of running high-impact projects around the world. So welcome, Rineet. Would you like to say hello?
Hi, Tenzin, and hello, everyone who's on the call today with us. Thanks a lot for having me here. Looking forward to a very good discussion.
Absolutely. And then we have Rahul Kumar Singh. So Rahul is the Chief Analytics Officer and co-founder at Sigmoid. With over 11 years in advanced machine learning and data science, Rahul comes with a very unique background and flavor of translating technology into business impact. And this is the focus of today's webinar, how we are impacting the business with advanced machine learning expertise. So welcome, Rahul. Would you like to say hello?
Hi, Tenzin. Thanks for watching, and thanks everyone to join us here. And I'm looking forward to a great discussion here.
Perfect. So I'm going to run through some logistics for today's webinar. We have about 45 minutes for the presentation, and we'll have Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. I have kept about 15 minutes for the Q&A, of course, depending on how good we do with our timing. And I would like to inform all the participants that they can submit their questions to the Q&A chat window down below. And I will try my best to answer all of your questions live. That's my goal. But in case I miss to answer any of your questions live today, I will be sure to respond to your questions offline after we finish the webinar. So with that, let's begin today's webinar. So just a quick segue talking about the current scenario, specifically around CPG advertising spend, right? So given the current situation, there has been kind of like a big shift in paradigm around, why CPG advertising online important, right? And how does that trend looks like? Where do CPG companies spend their advertising dollars? And how much should you be even spending on advertising? And COVID has a huge impact on this, and this data basically shows that we witness US digital ad spend surpass traditional media spend. And here's some trends that we began observing ever since the pandemic started, and a massive shift to online purchase thrust the digital spend. Like everybody's shopping online, right? These days, like even grocery, your daily needs, shopping in general. So when such consumer behavior changes, like business stakeholders, they need to act accordingly and they need to act sooner. So I want to ask Rineet, like how COVID has impacted his organization. And Rineet, if you could, comment on that a little bit and talk about, if that kind of a, situation drove your organization to maybe reprioritize your focus and initiatives within RB, that would be great.
Yeah, I think two very interesting charts that you just put forward here. Very clear, right? We are living through an inflection point. And before I get to COVID and what COVID does, I think the fact that digital spend is now overtaking traditional spend in advertising is just something that was long overdue. The marketers like us are now beginning to realize that there is much more value in spending measurable marketing dollars versus on traditional channels where the measurement is not as strong. And the inflection point that you saw on something like an Instacart completely, beating all the competitors. This is a clear indication of how our consumers are reacting to the change outside in the world. COVID has forced everyone to stay home. Lockdowns are all over the place, and automatically what has happened is people around our industry have started to reprioritize what they service, how they service. If you go to any of the shelves in US, you see a lot of them remain empty because there's specifically in our categories where we play, there is an amazing amount of surge in demand. There was a bit of pantry loading, but what we've begun to realize is there is a sustainable consumer behavior change that is happening. People have become more conscious about hygiene. They have become more conscious about what brands do they trust to solve their hygiene problems, their disinfection problems. And we are in a unique position, as you saw from the video, to actually answer to those needs. So what you will also see is a lot more focus now shifting towards educating consumers on what our brands stand for. And that's the first point there. There's a lot of focus on branding. We are getting a lot of new to brand consumers who are coming to our brand for the first time. It is very important for us to share what we can deliver to them and their household through our products and through what we stand for as a company. Then, the simple goal of marketing is you follow the consumer. Obviously we have to shift where the consumer is going. A lot of a very common term used in US called cord cutting. People are moving away from having cable TV connections to OTT, spending a lot more time on social. What you might have seen or not seen, even companies like Lysol, us and Dettol in the health side, we have run campaigns on TikTok to engage consumers, which is very, very different from what we used to do pre-COVID. And when you go to these channels, which are by definition high engagement channels, you have to be more personalized in the way you communicate with your consumers. A generic TV video, which used to be sufficient in our advertising, is no longer sufficient. We need to be able to talk to the consumer on the point that they engage with us. And hence the fact that we have to think more deeply about how we personalize our message and our offerings. And, not by design, but all these three lead to a lot of choices and decisions that our marketers are making at a much higher frequency than they were doing before. And they can't do that without having data. The other very important and interesting point is because of the inflection point that you saw, it is very clear that you can no longer rely on history as a good indicator of what is going to happen in the future. And hence, experience, although is very valuable, has sort of downgraded in the priority, and reading data and patterns has become much more important for companies like ours. So that's, in summary, the four key impacts that I see, which have been only exacerbated by COVID. They were long due, but I think what we are seeing this year is a transformation.
Totally, totally makes sense, Rineet. You know, like personalization, you know, engaged, be a trustworthy partner for your consumer. So absolutely makes sense to me. So now let's talk about, you know, some of the challenges involved in measuring the marketing effectiveness. And we all know like data availability is a key factor and the key challenge here. And, you know, we can show you some stats here to back that up. But before I do that, you know, let me ask our audience a quick poll question, and we'll do that within 15 seconds. But I really, really appreciate if everyone's, you know, participation here. Give me a quick second here. Yeah. And the question is, I'm going to start the, launch the poll. In your opinion, you know, how much data on CRM and loyalty do retailers share with CPG companies? You know, significant amount of data, fair amount of data, very little data, or nothing. Let's give about a few more seconds here. Interesting. Okay. Okay, end the poll. So here's the poll results, right? And, you know, so I think, you know, this is pretty like no secret in terms of how the consumer goods companies and retailers, like historically, you know, have not been on same page when it comes to like data sharing. And poll results are no different. So thank you for submitting that. Okay, let me close this. Okay, so as I was talking about, you know, the availability and accessibility to the data, like 90% of the CPG leaders cited data collection, activation, and scaling as key obstacles to achieving their marketing goals. And, you know, let's ask Rineet and Rahul this question, if you can comment on this a little bit, and also talk about like what, according to you, are, you know, maybe some of the other concerns that make the attribution problem a difficult one to crack.
Yeah, Tenzin, I might start here. So I think when you talk about data sharing, you know, it has to be clear to both parties what's in it for them, right? What's the value exchange? And traditionally, when you know, some of these decisions were as I said before, experience driven, less data driven. Even the demand from our side has not been very strong. We have not asked for it as urgently as we might. And on the other side, the retailers are also were not able to see the benefit for them, but now which is becoming more apparent for them, as they are also facing the issues of increasing competition with online players, new players who come in from nowhere and take away market share, etc. So it is a fair reflection what you're showing on the screen, but I think it is about to change.
Yeah, and this particular slide, Rineet, you know, it also talks about you know, sharing the CRM data, right? And that basically shows like how CPG has a very low CRM data compared to like any other industry. Do you have any like one-liner thoughts on that?
I would be a little careful clubbing CPG as a whole here. I think it's there is a category lens to it. For example, you know, our categories, which are low engagement categories, there tends to be less chatter, less talk on the web, and naturally the conversations that we can have are limited, and that's why what you see is there. But you're beginning to see a shift now. You know, companies like ours are talking about the purpose of our brands and what we can bring to consumers above and beyond just the product. And that's the game changer. And you will begin to see that this will grow as the focus shifts and the opportunities come up.
Any additional thoughts on that, Rahul?
Yeah, so primarily we have seen, there are different type of data sets, and when Rineet talked about the social and web information, that definitely depends on the category. But when we talk about sales information and try to measure the performance of marketing campaigns on sales, then primarily customer data is missing on the sales sort of information and transactions that Nielsen, IRI, or any of the retail companies are providing to CPG organizations. So it definitely depends on the type of report we are building and the type of modeling we are looking at. That not only the data set, but what different information or columns we achieve or sort of receive in the data set, that becomes the most important aspect from a technical and modeling perspective.
Makes sense. Thank you for that. So I think this is one of the very important factors, like GDPR implication to CPG marketers. And I'll have Rahul share his thoughts on this particular context.
Sure. So, so because of the GDPR, what we realized, and we faced this challenge primarily because most of the identifiable information of the customer is now starting to get reduced from these data sets, which are provided by different DSPs and marketing companies. So on the marketing side, I mentioned the sales side, the data is not provided, but also at a marketing side, the data is reducing significantly and a lot of important fields are missing. So building a kind of a customer database or identity graph is becoming much more challenging when you don't have access to that. Now, when you have private or your own DSPs that you can control, you might get access to some of those data sets. But because of GDPR, it is also getting down. And because of that reason, we have seen a shift towards having a direct connect to consumers that a lot of CPG companies are looking at. Maybe Rineet can add more to this aspect, this change which is happening.
Yeah, sure. I think the key here is consent, right? Companies like us have to be sensitive with personal information, and we always tend to be. But I think the regulations are enforcing that it is consistent behavior across the industry, and we are reacting to it. Yes, there are challenges and could tend to be a cause for sort of less sharing, but I think it's only the right thing for the future, that consumers' private data is protected, and then they feel that they can share this with the companies and the advertisers where they want to share it with, and is used responsibly. So I think it's a positive change. I look at it more as an opportunity rather than a threat. And as I said before, we have the right brands, the right products, the right solutions for our consumers that they would want to engage with us for our purpose and what we stand for.
Perfect. Yeah. So, now let me invite Rineet to share some thoughts on. I know this is a very important subject, and I know for sure, including some of the folks I know on the audience who are really, really interested to know the primary challenges and issues with the third-party report. Is it speed? Is it cost? Is it anything else? So Rineet, if you could spend some time on this and share your thoughts, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, sure. So I think the measurement of what your marketing dollar is doing in the market has been monopoly in some ways of partners who have been data rich traditionally. And what that does is, every time you need to read the market, it becomes an individual project or a request for an analysis, which then automatically means that there are certain lead times that you have to respect. So for an example, if you would like to read this for a Q1 set of campaigns, we would have to go back to the partner at the end of Q1 when the campaigns have all run. then they would have their own lead time of actually analyzing the data, preparing it for a presentation, which would then add another few weeks. So what tended to happen is you would end up learning anything with a timeline of 6 to 8 weeks after the end of the campaign. So forget about actually reacting during the campaign. Even the learnings and iterations that you can do are 3 to 6 months apart. The second big problem is a very standard offering. This is what we can do and this is what we cannot do. Today, what we are already seeing is the external environment is changing at a very rapid pace, and some of these standard offerings may not remain fit for purpose for a long time. And you need flexibility. You need to be able to read what you want to read, design test cases that you want to test for your category, for your segment, and the ideas that the marketers bring to the table. And it is becoming much easier with the data environment to be able to do that if you control the measurement piece. And then finally, there is an element of cost. Yes, the cost is significant because the output is of value. But the main thing here is then as we assign a bigger cost to this by going to a third party, automatically there is a prioritization. So we would then not invest this amount on some of our smaller brands or where there might be bigger opportunities, but just because the P&L doesn't allow, we would not do it. All these issues actually can be resolved if you think in-house, if you think your own model, if you think getting more control of the data so that you can overcome some of these challenges.
That's interesting. I think I also might have one of these slides that talks about this particular. I was really intrigued at the beginning. I thought like cost is going to be one of the key factors, but clearly like speed, agility, a dynamic capability seems to be a key focus around these different reporting structure. Okay, so now this is for both Rahul and Rineet, right? In terms of understanding why is marketing attribution a difficult problem to solve. So maybe Rahul, if you want to start, and then Rineet can join in later, that would be perfect.
So I would limit my comments on the CPG industry for this presentation because it is a difficult problem to solve, but it is primarily more difficult in CPG industry because the first and foremost, the most important aspect is matching the sales behavior, the sales data with the marketing information. And that match is missing primarily because customer information is not there and we cannot connect the two data set, which was the most important challenge I think that we faced. Other than that, there are other important challenges in terms of variability because there are too many causes of marketing campaigns, which is a common problem for measurement anyways. Conventional approaches, they don't work. As an example, regression, clustering, those kind of approaches don't work because they primarily depend on historical data, and there is very small amount of data to run any kind of modeling. And that is primarily the reason why when Rineet was sharing the information about they wait for a campaign to get over. So 3 to 4 months of data need to be collected before you can measure the impact of those campaigns. And that is the primarily challenge with conventional approaches. So there is a need to change the modeling approaches to make it a more faster kind of measurement possible.
Delivering so on and so forth. So for me, that having that control on and then the second bit, I think we've spoken a lot about having the access to the right data, having the technology framework to actually manage that data and orchestrate an outcome every week or with the frequency that actually has an impact on your operations.
Perfect. Thank you, Renee. So now we're going to talk about building attribution models for in-flight campaign optimization. And I'll have Rahul on this section. But before I do that, I have another poll question for audience. Let's do this in 15 seconds. And once again, I appreciate your participation here. Okay. So let me launch this. So to get a better understanding of the impact of marketing investment, which of the following marketing measurement methods do you use? Marketing mix modeling, multi-touch attribution, holdout testing, unified measurement approaches. I'm going to give a few more seconds to do that. Thank you very much. Still getting the, so okay. Let me end the poll. So here's the results, right? So I believe the poll results basically show most of you, kind of use like a common combination of these different methods, because each provides like a different insights and addresses different challenges, right? So whichever method a marketer chooses, I think it is best when used within a wider ecosystem of measurement and not in an isolation, right? So thank you very much for your participation on this. Okay, so let's move on and over to you, Rahul.
Sure. So in terms of the data sets, we have mentioned a lot of data sets, but primarily when we are trying to measure digital marketing campaigns over offline sales, then the most important two data sets are the sales information that we are getting on transaction level data set from retailers, and also the digital marketing data, primarily impressions that we measure through DSPs or DMPs. And in terms of, there are other data sets which could be supportive data sets, or in some of the cases, depending on the product that we are focusing on, there are some data sets which become quite custom to that particular problem. As an example, in case of RB, the Lysol brand that we are actually trying to build a campaign for, or a measurement for, weather data and WebMD data became quite important, because tracking the flu scenario and what is happening at certain point in time, it has a direct impact on sales. So understanding those different variability factors become important, but primarily digital marketing data and sales data are the minimum requirement for this kind of modeling.
Got it.
Yeah. Now, when we come to about data complications, I think one of the primary complications when we go for the kind of modeling that we went for to actually achieve the kind of speed which was required, one important factor is at what date level we have about customer, or the granularity within the data set that we have available. So TV information is always at a national level. We don't have any information regarding zip code level or DMA level variations and sort of how those campaigns run. So that is a primarily a very challenging aspect in terms of measurement of TV at a granular level of MTA. But in terms of Facebook, DCMs, which are most of the campaigns of digital that goes for, and also the sales. So we see that zip codes and DMAs are quite common in those data sets, and this is still available after GDPR restrictions. So I think that is the primarily valuable information that we need in the data set aspect. Other than that, there are common problems in terms of the different coverage of geography level. So it's not that for all cases we will get zip code and DMA information. There is always missing data set. Then even marketing spend, mapping the entire marketing spend, which RB or any company knows that we have spent sort of, let's say, $5 million. But matching it across all channels and making sure that we are matching those numbers becomes quite challenging, because a lot of times those spend numbers are not available. So we need to make some assumptions, or sort of use sampling approach to increase the data impact. And one another important data set which is typically missing is impression level spend, which is possible to gather from DSPs, but it's not, I think, put into a important category so far by most of the marketers. So that is why that kind of data set is not available. So these were, I think, some of the complications that we have faced while building the reports. Yes, in terms of modeling approaches, so there are two types of modeling approaches that are there in the market when we categorize it into this particular format. One is top-down approaches, which typically are used for market mix modeling, regression and clustering kind of approaches, where we look at the entire spend and try to break it down into different channels and say how that spend actually added the value for us. When the causes of variability becomes too many and the factors in the model becomes very high, so it becomes very challenging to actually measure anything out of those reports, because the number of experiments, or let's say if we are running a campaign for 3 months, there is hardly, even if we sort of store the entire data of 3 months, we have 90 days or around 12 weeks of data, which is very less data points in terms of making any confident decisions out of. The other flip side is bottom-up approaches, which are quite common in most of the industry, which is first touch, last touch, linear, and so on. But that doesn't work in terms of the CPG industry, because as I mentioned, customer data is not available. So building a customer journey becomes almost impossible in this case. So we need to come up with technique which is closer to bottom-up approach and which can also solve the problem of the CPG industry. And primarily these kind of approaches, they don't require a lot of data to be present in the history. And they are, I would say, true measurement kind of things, because we can just look at this week's or this day performance and try to measure which campaigns are doing good. So that is, I think, a stark differentiation from the top-down approach, which needs to have history to make those decisions. And in terms of COVID times, I think those kind of approaches don't perform good, because you are anyway relying on history, and history is not giving the right picture right now. So I think bottom-up approaches is the way to go for this kind of scenario.
Got it. Perfect. Okay.
This is, I think, primarily the approach that we used for modeling this particular problem. So quasi-experimental design is an area of design of experiment where when a randomized control trial is not a possibility, so experiment design is not in our control. So how can we measure without controlling the experiment by ourselves? And there are a lot of aspects which needs to be taken care of to make this approach much more accurate and reach the kind of requirement that a company or marketers have. But these are some of the aspects which we were able to control and get a lot of benefit out of it in terms of speed as well as accuracy. And this approach actually helped us significantly to handle COVID considerations, as I mentioned, because it can handle COVID kind of situations out of the box. And I think that was primarily very good value addition on top of whatever we were building, that it can handle scenarios which are very unique into the market, and it doesn't break in terms of the kind of insights it is providing to the business.
Moving on.
Some other concerns that need to be addressed, some of them are quite common, some of them are more business friendly in terms of, so multi-collinearity is one of the, I think, challenge which I think a lot of marketers have faced, that when there are multiple campaigns running at the same time with the same audiences, how do we measure or separate out their impacts? Accounting for a lot of other factors which we might not have data about, that can also impact the sort of attribution errors and cause attribution errors in the reports. So we need to manage those kind of impacts. Synergy is another aspect. If we can have multiple campaigns who are adding to each other and they are sort of having a boosted impact. Then on a business side, halo effect is important, which is how do we measure impact of other brand campaigns onto the brand that we are looking at? How do we ensure coverage on a marketing side as well as the sales side? And then another aspect is post-campaign attribution. So even after the campaign is ended, we need to measure how good that campaign actually performed. So all the sort of KPIs and reports needs to take care of all these aspects to make the report much more useful for the marketers and get the right adoption. These are few aspects in terms of when we are building these kind of systems, we need to take care of not only a single brand on which the project is working on, but also the same methodology, how generalized it is across multiple brands. Can we make small changes in terms of the data sets and differences in the data without making much changes in the architecture and technical side? And obviously, there are a lot of challenges in terms of taking these models into production, which is always there in terms of how do we auto scale, how do we handle the entire pipeline and the scale of the pipelines, and what are the different technological choices in the organization, which is sort of a primary engineering decisions that they have made and investments that they have made. So we need to build systems according to their needs. This is, I think, one of the most important aspect is how do we evaluate something like a report, which is in itself a feedback, right? So how do you test if your feedback and reports are actually the right reports? So because there is no benchmark, which is typically there in a classification kind of a problems. So one important aspect that we see work wonders is finding anomalies. So finding areas which are showing some abnormal behavior and then doing root cause analysis to understand why that kind of abnormal behavior is present. Sometimes it is from the data itself and it's the behavior of the customer, and it could be a justified kind of anomaly. But in a lot of scenario, it can also be that we are making some mistakes and we need to improve the technique some more, sort of account for the areas of error. Business knowledge and feedback is extremely important, including the analyst or the marketers into the mix and getting constant feedback to iterate over the report. And finally, the most important is testing in the real world, where we use the feedback and information of these reports to run live campaigns and then track how the kind of value these campaigns are generating for the company. So I think these are primarily three different ways we have tested, and all three of them, in our opinion, are important to test any of this kind of model building. So, so this is another aspect which is important in terms of getting the right adoption, because I think dashboarding is important to make the entire report and system easily accessible to the marketers. And we build these reports primarily so that it becomes easier for the marketers. And there are a lot of different analysis that we built onto this report. I will quickly share the dashboard that we have built for the audience, and then we can go back onto.
Okay, so I've stopped sharing. So Rahul, you can take control.
Thanks. Yeah, so let me know if this screen is visible.
It is.
Okay, great. So in terms of the dashboard, because MTA is a kind of reporting technology which is very granular, and it gives us details which are much more granular compared to marketing mix report. So in this case, we can look at, which is obvious, is different campaigns, how good are they performing in terms of different metrics. So ROI is one of the most important metrics that marketers look for. Other than that, we have something like effectiveness, incremental units, how much spend they have made, and so on in terms of the metrics. Then other than the campaign, the primary use case is to compare creatives, how a particular creative is performing into different campaigns, and we can see which creatives have done wonders to the company compared to also audiences, because audiences is another information which is important, which marketers want to understand from an MTA report, and which is not something any kind of MMM and other reports can provide. So this is um, I think these kind of insights are the most important ones that we identify. We look at the top performers and bottom performers. And as we can see, there is a top performer where spend is very low. And there are a lot of bottom performers where we are spending almost the same amount. So it makes sense to sort of shift your spends from bottom performers to top performers and try to get better value out of it. And this kind of dashboard we are able to generate every week. So for sort of, if we choose any um, particular time period, we can look at the entire history of within that time period of these entire tactics, placements, creatives, channels, and so on, and also for different product segments. So we can look at the entire performance of the marketing team or the marketing campaigns, and also at a different granular level, and see how they are performing in different time periods. So these kind of reports can be built very easily once we have the primarily system set up. And depending on the marketer's requirement, adding a new sort of page or kind of analysis into this report is just 1 or 2 days job, as compared to weeks or months in case of traditional dashboard or traditional MT reports that they have access to. So I'll stop here and give you back the control.
Okay. Okay, so we completed this, attribution dashboard with high refresh rate that Rahul just walked through. Now, okay, Rahul, do you want to spend some time on this model adoption as well?
Yeah, I think we have covered a lot of aspects to why adoption or how adoption can be achieved. I think just 1 or 2 points that I wanted to highlight here primarily is involvement of marketing team with the data scientist is important to achieve this kind of report, because uh, they are the primary users of these reports, right? So they have to understand what we are building, what are the different use cases that they have, and are we giving them exactly what they need in the right format and structure that they are looking for, and also what are their business priorities and what kind of mistakes they can make with if they don't understand the kind of nitty-gritties of the reports. So building, I think, that kind of a rapport and that discussion is extremely valuable, at least when we are doing this kind of exercise within any company. Another aspect was more or less a lot of data issues that creeps in, which had to be resolved. As an example, in data, we can have a lot of different type of naming conventions from different vendors and DSPs. But when we have to present it in terms of marketers, so we need to understand their language and how do they want these different reports to be presented, because they are actually have access to multiple reports and they need to sort of combine those reports to look at the overall picture. So understanding their needs is important, understanding the spend coverage, because that is another quite important, I think, aspect for them, that am I able to measure each and every dollar that I'm spending in the market, and we are not missing onto those aspects. Similarly, sales coverage, a lot of time sales in all the geographies is not present. So that needs to be covered based on the report. And also, I think another important aspect that we saw was how do they define profit for a particular product that we are trying to measure, specifically for ROI. Because identifying incremental units is one challenge, but as soon as we go for what is the return on the overall investment in terms of dollars, so having a business discussion and decision onto how do we define profit for a product, because the pricing keeps on changing in the market. So there needs to be a standard way of getting the profit aspects of a product.
Okay, perfect. So I know, for the interest of time, let's just try to finish the slides. And I know that I'm getting a lot of questions on the Q&A. So I would still encourage everyone to post their questions on the Q&A poll. We'll go through that momentarily. But Rineet, any additional comments on this in terms of like, how did you go about model adoption, or, just initial thoughts on like model adoption in your scenario over at RB?
Yeah, I think the two important things for me is what is the source of truth today? That could be a third-party report, that could be intuition. I don't know, it could be different for different things. Measure the outcome versus that source of truth to build that trust on the outcome. And second bit, make sure that, the marketers are involved through the process of actually solving the problem, so that they understand that it's not a black box. It's actually a well thought out, solution that is then easier to believe, because eventually the way you can actually build the trust is through testing, and that testing will only happen once you start to try some of the outcomes that the report is showing. So that has been the key for us in RB at least.
Okay, perfect. I think this might be a great segue to get into a slide on how RB improved marketing effectiveness measurement. Over to you, Rineet.
Yeah, I think a lot of points were made in the beginning, right, around the challenges, the lead time, the fact that it's in many ways a little bit of a black box, so there's a lack of flexibility, and then the not so important cost aspect. And I think we took a strategic decision to bring this capability in-house with Sigmoid, and have been successful in actually resolving all of these challenges. So we now have a model which runs every week. We have a weekly rhythm and operating model where we look at the outcomes of that model. We have discussions and decisions that we take on what, if anything, are we going to change? Is there any experiment that we are going to run? Then we read the outcome of that experiment and then actually bring it into our library of insights that we are now beginning to maintain. There were a lot of data that we did not know we had access to, or we did not think we should go after, which we have brought in as part of this program, which has given us immense asset for the future. We started to read channels that we were not able to read because we were limited with some of the capabilities on the third party. And as I said, because of the cost savings, we have been, the model doesn't discriminate between our brands and categories. And as long as you have the data, you can read any campaign, and that has been immensely powerful for us. So some of this is still in plan, work in progress, but the case that we started with in RB with Lysol has been a massive success for us.
That's perfect. And so I think Rahul, if you want to share some light on like what is building solution internally and externally looks like. Do you have any thoughts or comments on this?
Yeah, so the benefits that we achieved, so primarily when we started working on this project, so the earlier state, as Rineet had already mentioned, was it always takes more than 3 months to get a report out for any campaign. So by the time campaigns were already over, in the current state, we are able to update weekly in terms of the reports. And primarily, some of the challenges why we are weekly and not faster is because of some of the data sources, and rather than the challenges of the modeling side. But 1 week, I think, is a good enough time for marketers based on our experience and based on the discussion. They were also happy with a month, but this system is able to achieve weekly. So I think that is the most powerful. Secondly, we were able to measure videos. So OTT, YouTube, and all video channels is now possible, because in other reports, these were underrepresented and these channels were not there. In terms of cost, I have mentioned it is significantly lower because it's an in-house solution. As soon as if we have access to the data and we have just resources to crunch that data, which is very, very low in terms of the computation cost. So in that terms, the costs, there are significant savings across the organization on marketing reports. This is much more transparent because you know exactly how the model is built, what are the different areas where it can make mistakes, and what are the area of improvements for the marketers. And it is more like an iterative process to make it as good as possible from that information. Dashboard interface is much more flexible compared to a static interface of standard industry reports, because now it can be made much more customized to the marketer's need. And finally, the lead time has gone significantly less, because if I have a solution which is specific for the entire market, and I'm sort of targeting the entire market, so any needs need to be common need for it to get addressed through that solution or system. But when you have an internal in-house solution, you can just focus on your specific needs and become much more customized and stronger for your measurements. So these were, I think, some of the primary benefits that in-house solution got into place. And as it is very cheaper right now, companies can also have sort of both the reports if they want, because cost is not an aspect right now, and they could take their time, sort of get accustomed to this new state of being and becoming more faster in terms of changing the campaigns.
That's perfect. And Rineet, any last thoughts on this? I know you've covered this, sometime before, but any additional thoughts on external versus in-house solution?
Yeah, I think there is a strategic aspect of it, right? There is pros and cons of going internal. Some of the points I mentioned beforehand, but there is one big element which I would personally like to share is the education, because just going through this experience with you guys has taught me a lot about this space, which has then also broadened my perspective on where the investments need to be for technology going forward. So I think that's in many ways an underrated benefit, but for me personally was very helpful, and I would highly recommend that people consider that as part, because the organizational education that happens by actually going through this process of looking at the data, understanding how you make these connections, how you can design tests, it's fantastic.
Perfect. Thank you, Renee. So I know we're almost at the top of the hour, so I have one last poll question, and I promise you I'll finish this within 30 seconds. Okay, let's do this. Okay, and yeah, and if you can just, answer this particular in terms of like if you would like to schedule a free, workshop with the Sigmoid group to discuss any ways to improve your marketing attribution in your organizations, and we're all here to help you, support you, and I think this is quite like important kind of a question for us to understand how we are doing. If there's any way we can improvise on the webinar, any feedback would be much appreciated, and thanks for the participation. Yes, I'll not share the result, but whatever option you've chosen, we'll definitely write back to you. Thank you for that. So this basically ends our webinar for today, and thank you all once again for being such a wonderful audience, and I hope we did justice to your 60 minutes time spent with us. And for the interest of time, let's run through some of the questions. Okay, so I think I saw some of the really interesting ones, and the first question, perhaps Rineet can answer that. It says, what is impression level spend? How is this different from cost per impression?
Yeah, I think maybe Rahul's better placed to answer that. The new concept for me also.
This question. So impression level spend is typically when a DSP actually buy a particular impression from the market. Ultimately, they have to bid a certain price for it, and whatever is that bid amount on which they actually win that impression. So that is different for different impressions. It's not a summarized value across all impressions that we get, and it is quite important to understand maybe for which audiences and which kind of areas we are spending more compared to others. So getting that sort of granularity in the data is quite useful. But in when we don't have access to it, we can use cost per impressions, which is a summarized value across all impressions to look at more impression level analysis. But impression level actual spend is quite useful if it is available, and we are able to get that information out from DSPs.
Perfect. Thank you, Rahul. So I think the next question might be for Rineet. It says, there's no perfect state as it is a continuous improvement. And then how did you finalize what the first rollout state would be?
Yeah, I think in any of these data science type of solutions and projects, it is very important to articulate very clearly the scope and the benefit that you're trying to drive. As you know, we've spoken a few times. What success meant to us was very clear. If you ask about the accuracy of the outcome, I said we had a source of truth that we as a business relied on, and we benchmarked the outcome versus that source of truth with the full knowledge of how close we are going to get to it because of the understanding of what data is available on both sides. So I think those are the two levers that we used in RB to judge the readiness of the first outcome of the program.
Perfect. Thank you, Rineet. And I think the next question might be for Rahul. Like, it says, how much time does it take to build a similar dashboard leveraging MTA for a new brand or a company?
So it depends on the kind of brand and company and their, frankly, the state of data. But once the data is available, it takes around 4 weeks to 8 weeks to build the first level of reports. And then we can go for iterations. And I would say in a quarter or maybe 4 months, we could get to a state where the company can start to use these kind of reports for weekly insights on the campaigns.
Okay, here's the
slightly changes in terms of like now for RB we have already done that. So for new brands it becomes much more easier and it could be much more faster. But for a typical company, primarily the kind of states, I would assume like to get to the adoption stage, it will take around 4 months.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's perfect. So I think the next question, it says, are you seeing sustained changes in consumer shopping behavior post-COVID? If yes, how long do you think it will stay?
Yeah, I can answer this one. I think at this point, this is anybody's guess, to be very honest, but we are making some educated guesses. Again, it's a very, very category-driven lens that we have. It's very different for certain categories, is different for others. For example, household cleaning products, etc. Right now, we are seeing a massive uptick because people are spending a lot more time at their houses. And we have an estimate of how the working environment and the school system, etc., will evolve out of this. And then that, will then modify how much of time people spend at home versus outside. But it's definitely going to increase, right? Work from home is becoming more common. This whole webinar we are doing, fully online, and so many people have joined us, and it's become very common to do these kinds of things. So there is this element of sort of predicting some of the behavioral aspects of what COVID has driven. And then, of course, there is the science behind COVID itself. There is this whole anybody's guess on how long it will take for the vaccines to appear, what will happen when the vaccines appear. Will we be able to get herd immunity? Will it happen in which markets, when? So there's a lot of moving parts. And I think it would be in the interest of companies like us to start having a first stab at and predicting some of this and planning for it.
Okay, perfect. And I would request just one more question, if that's okay with you. Like, I really want to answer this. It says, have you found major difference in ROI when shifting from last touch to MTA? Was there a particular channel that was undervalued previously? Can one of you spend about like maybe 30 seconds on this? I would really appreciate that.
I would give it to Rahul on this one.
Sure. So trade promotion was not part of the modeling because that information was not present for the digital campaigns. So that was not in scope for this project, but that can be easily factored in with the same approach. So it's not a limitation in terms of that we cannot do it, but it's more towards that was not the goal of the project. I think, what was the second part of the question here?
It says, have you found difference in ROI when shifting from last touch to multi-touch attribution?
So we did not shift from last touch primarily because, if we look at from the third party vendor, they have extra data. So we moved from there. So primarily we saw the differences in the video campaigns because that was not present in terms of the information. But for other channels, results were quite correlated. Obviously, in some areas, they were different, not exactly the same. But now it's anybody's guess when there is difference between two reports which are built from two completely different methodologies, which of those reports are sort of accurate in all aspects. So I think wherever they correlate, you are much more confident that those insights are perfect. And whenever you see differences, then it depends on which of those reports you trust a lot. Now, this is a new report that we have built in, so it will still take some more time, I would say, for marketers to continuously use to figure out which areas you should trust this report better than the other report. So I would not sort of make a kind of a claim that the system is sort of, whenever it makes a kind of difference, then I should always trust this report. But yeah, in some of the areas, as an example, which are more accustomed to that particular product, there are few channels which are accustomed to those kind of products. There we saw some differences, and also on the video campaigns.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you so much, Rahul. And I know I've not been able to answer there like many questions, and I'm really I really appreciate you sending all of these questions. But I promise you I will get back with maybe like a more detailed responses to those questions after the webinar. And we've recorded this session, and you all will receive the link to the recorded session. But thank you all again for staying throughout, and we hope this was helpful to you. And we are looking forward to having maybe a one-on-one with all of you, right? And please, feel free to reach out to us if you have any specific questions, or just ping me on LinkedIn, right? So also please like our LinkedIn page for more such interesting events in the future, and we would love to stay in touch and stay engaged. And this is Tenzin Namdak with Sigmoid Group, and our guest speaker, Rineet Ratnakar from RB, signing off. Take care.